Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this will be a prediction video for the next episode of Star Trek Discovery, and it might contain possible spoilers. And I will be basing everything I say on the trailer as well as the sneak peek of the next episode and some online theories I heard about, and specifically a rumor that the Guardian of Forever is going to appear in the next episode, and I think it fits with what we know about the next episode from that footage, as well as the rumor that there's going to be a Section 31 show in which Georgiou will be a main character in, and so I think it all fits together. And I said many times I'm really not looking forward to the Section 31 show, especially if it's going to be set once again in the time of the prequel. And the Section 31 were okay as the villains in Deep Space Nine. They were obviously not following the principles of Starfleet and the Federation. They were going against that, even though they said they're doing it for the greater good, that they're doing a necessary evil. And so that is an interesting idea that makes them complex villains because they might be doing some bad things for good reasons, for good intentions, but I don't think a Star Trek show should have them as the heroes of the show. And especially concerning is the fact that they're aiming for it to be set once again as a prequel, which is a very bad idea. If it was set in this new time period, maybe that would be more acceptable, especially since the Federation and Starfleet don't really exist anymore as a galactic power, and so maybe Section 31 being like vigilantes would make sense in this time period. But if they're going to send her back in time to the same time that she left in, that will bring back all the same problems that I had with Discovery from the beginning, because they didn't pay attention to the details, they constantly messed things up. And that's also a concern I have with the Pike show, even though the guy who played Pike was great in my opinion, and so at least that has the potential to actually be a good show, especially if they will go back to the old formula of Star Trek, in which they will be meeting new civilizations and all of that. So the title of the new Pike show seems to indicate that, so maybe I will like that show despite it being a prequel. But Section 31 I don't think should be a show. Maybe if she's a recurring character in the Pike show, maybe it will make some sense, but I don't really like this idea, and I never really liked this character. I liked her as the original Georgiou, who was a good person in the first episode. She was basically almost like a female Picard, but the way that this new character was acting for the whole season and the previous season, in my opinion, was annoying, even though she was funny a few times, but most of the time she's annoying. So these are my general thoughts on the whole direction of it, and now I'm going to discuss what I think will be in the next episode that is partially designed to set all of that up, and maybe it will be good for this season because at least they'll get rid of her character in this season. This will be her final episode on Discovery, so at least for Discovery this is probably good news. If they send her away back in time through the Guardian of Forever portal, maybe it will be a good thing for this show. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about the sneak peek we saw of the next episode, in which we see that guy with the glasses who interviewed Georgiou in a previous episode. And since then, she was behaving strangely, she has some strange flashbacks, and in the recent episode, it's revealed that she's dying because something on her subatomic level is off or something like that. And in the sneak peek, we see him talking about her and explaining a lot more information. The only disappointing thing is that apparently he's not a villain, because some of the indications previously was that maybe he took her over, that he brainwashed her or something like that, that he's not such a nice guy, or maybe a Section 31 agent himself doing something for the greater good. And you know, she's an evil character, so doing something to her is not necessarily wrong, I would say. And some theories were that maybe he fixed whatever is making her evil, and that will turn her into a good character, because they also set up that the Terrans from the mirror universe are evil because of something in their biology, and that that can presumably be fixed. And so maybe he actually fixed her somehow to make her good, and then suddenly she will have a conscience, and maybe that's why she's now suddenly having flashbacks of a person that died. So there were a lot of interesting theories about all of that, but apparently none of them are true. He didn't brainwash her, he didn't do anything to her. What's happening to her is a result of her being from the mirror universe as well as from a different time, and that's what's causing her to become sick. And that's why I conclude that the solution will be to send her back in time to her own time period, so that she will not die. And of course that also will raise all kinds of logical questions, because if she's now in the past with the memories that she has of the future, she might change the future, and so everything might change again. So that might be a problem, and definitely would be illegal in this time period in which they said that time travel is illegal. So the Discovery will have to answer for it somehow. I guess they will fake her death. They'll say that she dies on this ice planet, and that's why she's gone. And so they'll not tell the Admiral that they actually sent her back in time. And maybe they'll wipe out her memory. Maybe they will do something to her so that she cannot affect the past. Or maybe the Guardian of Forever itself will promise them that she will not do anything to interfere with this time period. And maybe it will even say that she'll be in a different timeline or something. Because, in the past, in the original Star Trek show as well as the original animated show, they said that the Guardian is the focal point of all the timelines in the galaxy, and so it can also send people to other dimensions. And so maybe they can finally explain what was happening in this show all along, that maybe all of this show is in a separate timeline from the others. And they also mentioned briefly the Kelvin timeline, because when the guy in the glasses shows a hologram of a Starfleet officer who somehow traveled to the future, he also somehow arrived into a different dimension, a different timeline, and that originally he comes from a timeline which was created by a Romulan mining ship. And so that sounds very much like Nero's ship in Star Trek 2009. And so this alien guy in a Starfleet uniform is apparently from the Kelvin timeline, which might explain the continuity issues with his uniform, because 2379 is the time of Star Trek Nemesis, and yet the uniform he's wearing is of the early TNG era, which was over a decade before that. Yet the comm badge he's wearing is from the time of Voyager and Nemesis, and so there seems to be a mix-up with the continuity. But if it's all set in a different timeline, the Kelvin timeline, then that might explain it. So maybe some differences in the designs is okay because it's in a different timeline to the normal one. And so the guy in the glasses explains that because that guy traveled not only to the future from the past, but also somehow ended up in a different timeline, that caused him to be destabilized and to die from it. And so apparently traveling in time might be risky for your health. And even though we didn't really often see that happen, but maybe it all depends on how long you were in a different time period, or how many times you jumped in time. And I think we did see something like that in Voyager, in an episode when the temporal police recruited 7 of 9 to make her jump in time instead of them, because they couldn't do it for some reason. And so I remember they recruited 7 of 9, and yet they kept saying that she's going to die if she does a few more jumps, that it might be fatal for her. And so we do have that same idea in the old Trek shows, that time travel might be risky for your health. And so the guy in the glasses explains that, and he says that apparently your molecules like to stay in the time that they were created. And I'm really glad they said molecules and not atoms in that sentence, because if he said atoms, I would have laughed at that whole line, because our atoms are created inside of stars in the fusion reaction, and then when those stars become supernovas and it all explodes and flies all over and then becomes part of other planets and all of that. So the time your atoms got created was actually billions of years ago. And so the sentence that they would like to stay in the time they were created wouldn't really be relevant to the time travel that we see in Star Trek, because it's always just a few hundred years back or forward, and so it's really irrelevant compared to billions of years in which the atoms were created. And so his sentence wouldn't have made sense, but he said molecules, which makes it a little bit better, because when we are born and we grow, and so different atoms get collected and get reassembled into new molecular structures. And so technically he would be correct in saying that they got created in our own lifetime. And so I'm really glad they didn't say the word atom in that sentence. And scientifically speaking, I can buy this whole idea, because we can say maybe molecular structures have a sort of an internal clock. They know when they get put together, and so if you jump them to a different time period, it might cause some disruption. And so I'm willing to buy this theory, and also it kind of fits continuity, because something like that was mentioned in Voyager previously, and so I would be okay with that. And also it's a good idea to put some kind of limitation on time travel in general, I think, because even though we do know that time cops exist and all of that, at least existed, I guess, before this season of Discovery, but putting some kind of limitation on them and restricting what they can do is a good thing. Otherwise they can be basically like you, they can do whatever they want as many times as they want. But putting the limitations on them would explain why they are not all powerful, and also it would explain why they always had to recruit people from the past. Why couldn't they just use their own agents? Why did Daniels constantly have to recruit Archer, for example, instead of using his own people. And so this limitation can actually explain that. So he never told Archer that. He never told him, time traveling is dangerous to your health. He just told him some nonsense about that he doesn't have enough time to send his own people, which is a ridiculous statement coming from a time traveler, that he doesn't have enough time in the future to do it. And so we can say that the real reason he constantly sent Archer on his missions was because he went on too many missions himself anyway. And also it might explain why he was sending a projection of himself. They said that some of the time travelers didn't physically go back in time, and instead they were sending some kind of advanced projection of themselves, which can also do things in the past. So we can now explain it by saying that the reason they did it like that was to avoid this damage to their own molecular structure from the time traveling. And so he explains that because that alien Starfleet officer was sent not only to the future but was also from a different dimension, a different timeline, that was kind of too much. That was like the last straw, and because of that combination of factors, it caused him to die, and that is what is happening with Georgiou. And presumably that will be the reason they will have to send her back in time to her own time period, and maybe even to her own dimension, which I guess they will not do, because if they want to do a Section 31 show with her, then they'll want to keep her in the normal Star Trek timeline. And so I think in the next episode, in order to save her life, Michael will escort her to the planet in which they'll detect some kind of temporal signature or something, and then they'll go there and meet the Guardian of Forever, and hopefully they will keep it as similar as possible to the original one. And it's actually something I always wanted to see again in Star Trek, because we only saw it in the original Star Trek and once in the animated show, and never since, even though we had some similar things like the Iconian gateways and a similar gateway in an episode of Deep Space Nine. But the original Guardian of Forever, I think, is very iconic and very kind of cool, interesting idea, and so I would like to see it again, and hopefully they'll keep it in line with what came before, and also have that element of it being like a sentient entity, because it wasn't just a gate, it wasn't just a machine, it also seemed to have intelligence, and it offered itself as a guide to help people go to different time periods, and also presumably to help them avoid creating a mess. And so maybe they can actually use this to help explain away a few more things, and also to try to fix them even. And so if they say that it can actually send you to other timelines, that will immediately be much more interesting, and also avoid the problem I mentioned of her creating even more mess if she goes back in time now with the knowledge of the future. Then how possibly will it not mess up the future? So maybe the Guardian can actually kind of guarantee the safety of the timeline, because it's also an intelligent entity, very advanced entity looking out for the timeline, will prevent me from complaining about the problem of the mess it will create in the timeline. And we have some visual shots of the promo of the next episode, in which we see Michael and Georgiou walking on snow and leaving footmarks, and I kind of like this shot because it reminds me of the first episode of Discovery, in which they were walking on sand and also leaving marks. And so I think it's kind of a nice reference to that, because if it will be her final episode on this show, it's nice to kind of visually mirror it with the first episode of the show, in which they were also leaving the footmarks. And so I kind of like the visual callback to that. And it's probably going to be a drama heavy episode, and maybe they'll reveal some more things about her backstory to make her more sympathetic before getting rid of her, and she'll probably have some emotional stuff with Michael, in which they will resolve their animosity and all of that, and forgive each other and whatever, and then they'll send her back through the Guardian back in time. And maybe they will tie it to the bigger plot somehow, because if they don't erase her memory, then maybe she can do something in the past to actually help them out, like maybe prepare a stash of dilithium and hide it somewhere for them to find in the future. That might be a clever way for her to somehow help them out in the future. Presumably, if the dilithium was not inside of warp cores, then it does not explode, and so that whole secret stash of dilithium can then be recovered in the future after they have sent her back, and that might help out Starfleet in this time period, because I guess it takes a while to reproduce the spore drive to other ships, and so for now at least they will have a lot more dilithium, which will make them stronger. And so that's something I'm hoping is going to happen, because it's actually clever. And I'm still curious how they will fit that short trek Calypso into this season, because we know that at some point Discovery itself is going to be sent back in time. Maybe it will happen in this episode, who knows, maybe the Guardian will say I can only send her back if she goes back together with the ship. Or maybe she will want to take the ship in order to stack the ship with the lithium and then hide the whole ship in some nebula. And so I'm guessing it will not be all in the same episode. So I'm guessing these are separate issues. So I'm guessing they will only send Georgiou back in time, and maybe she will help them out somehow in the future. And the whole thing about the ship itself being sent back in time will probably be later on, maybe in the end of the season or some other episode. I really don't think there's going to be another 1,000-year jump to the future again. I really doubt that, and also the number is too close to be a coincidence. So I think these are the same 1,000 years that have now been skipped. The ship will go back in time at some point and then wait the 1,000 years to get back to the future again. For some reason, I guess it will be explained later, hopefully. And in this episode, Georgiou is going to be sent back in time on her own and maybe do something to help them out. And I'm also curious if this episode will have anything about the burn, because in the previous episode they said that they discovered the source of the burn and also detected a Starfleet distress signal coming from the same place in which it originated. And so will they not go there in the next episode? So I'm kind of presuming they will, and maybe it will somehow be connected. Maybe it's the same planet on which the Guardian of Forever is located. My hunch is telling me no, it's going to be a separate storyline, otherwise it's just too convoluted. And an interesting idea would be, once they go into that nebula to find the distress call, if they will actually find the USS Discovery itself, maybe the same one that we saw in the short trek Calypso. So maybe they will find their own ship, which at some point later will be sent back in time. So that might be interesting kind of time loop, which would also be similar to an episode of Voyager in which they detected a distress signal and they went to look for it, and then they found that it was sent by Voyager itself and caused them to get trapped in the same place and then send out the distress signal for themselves to get picked up. And so that was kind of a time loop episode, and so it might be an interesting idea to do something like this. The only problem with that is that it will give them the idea of what to do. Like if for some reason they need to send the ship itself back in time again, and then they find themselves later, that will be kind of a problem, because where did that idea come from originally? If they will basically have to do it. If they find the ship that they send later to the past and they find it already, that means they have to do it now. They cannot avoid it, because avoiding it will create a paradox. It will create a breach of the time loop and a whole bunch of mess, and so it will basically tie their hands. And also it means the idea itself didn't come from them. They're simply following what happened already, and so it kind of removes the whole free will and intelligence of the character. And so I'm not sure I like this idea, but it might be interesting if it's done well and if it has some kind of logical reason for it, like the one I mentioned about maybe Georgiou helping them out in the past somehow. Maybe she will need the ship in the past for some reason to accomplish something to help them out in this time period. And so I'm kind of curious to see what they'll do, but these are the points I wanted to talk about in this video. In my opinion, most of the episode will be just about Georgiou, and maybe later, maybe in the end of the episode, after they finish her storyline, maybe then they'll go into that nebula and they'll find their own ship, which will be the one from the short trek, which apparently somehow got unretrofitted because it looked exactly like it looked in season 2, and also without that A. And so maybe because they need to send their own ship to the past, they will have to hide all that future technology or to remove it. And so maybe they will find their old ship without the future tech. They will all transfer into that ship and then send a more advanced ship back in time so that it will become this ship, and then it will resolve that whole short trek issue. But what is the reason for doing that? So I'm curious how they'll explain that. What excuse will they need? Why send the ship back in time? Especially since it was so dangerous for it to be in that time period for some reason because of control and all of that. So sending it back to that same problematic time again, after everything they did to try to do the opposite, to go to the future, now to send it back to the time would be kind of ridiculous. So unless they have a really good excuse, it might be a very silly plot point, which they have to do just to explain the short trek. So I guess we'll wait and see. And if they have to get rid of all the future tech before sending the ship into the past, and now they are transferring to the ship they find in the nebula, which is from the past without the future tech, it will be kind of funny if they then return to Starfleet headquarters without all the retrofitting, looking like they did when they first arrived. I'm really curious to see the reaction of the Admiral, because they'll just come there again and suddenly their ship is again old, and then the Admiral asks what the hell happened, why is your ship again not retrofitted? And then they'll tell him about the time loop, and they'll say, oh, we had to send it back in time to the time period that we had to escape from. We had to send it back to the same time period, and then we found it in the nebula and we transferred to it, and so now we don't have the future tech because we deleted it just in case so that no one can find it in the past, and now just do a retrofit again, just do it all over again for now again. I'm really curious to see the face of the Admiral if such a scene happens. That might be kind of comedy gold, because you know how angry he was that he says, you're time travelers, you're not supposed to, you're technically criminals. So if after all of this they do it again and they become time travelers again in a way, that might be hilarious. And so maybe they'll simply lie to him, maybe they'll pretend nothing happened so that no one will know except them, and there's no time violations that way, no repercussions legally. So obviously all of this might be a huge mess if they don't write it properly. It might be a really unintentional comedy for me, but if it's done well, which I doubt, it might actually be clever. So I guess we'll wait and see how they'll do it in the next episode. So all of this was just my speculation, my theories about all of this. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.